Hello everyone, I am Rosie, and today we are embarking on a journey to create as many games as possible in a single month. As you can see to my right here, we have a slot machine. This will generate us the type of game we are going to create. When I pull this lever here, it will generate us a theme, a genre, and a goal. The theme and genre will define our setting and basic game mechanics, while the goal will define what the win condition should be for the player. We have many different options for each category, and sometimes these attributes can line up well together, while other times, however, things can get strange and challenging combinations. With that being said, let's jump right into it and see what our first game is going to be. Alright, let's see what we're going to get. Okay, theme is sci-fi. Our genre is survival, and our goal needs to be to defend. Okay, so theme and genre, pretty self-explanatory. Sci-fi, survival. Okay, that could be an interesting combination. And then our goal of defend. Okay, so I'm thinking we do some sort of like territory defend, like a King of the Hill. And then sci-fi survival. Okay, so maybe you are being surrounded by some sort of alien creature and you have to defend the area. Okay, I think that's a good starting point, so let's just go from there and see where it leads. Okay, so the first thing we want to accomplish is getting the character's movement and the camera controller in place. So I think to do this well, a first-person shooter style would work best. Once we have that in place, getting the scale of the world and the environment will be much easier. So now that we've got that in place, let's go check out how it looks. Okay, so now as you can see, we've got our movement and our camera working properly. We've got the basics of just move left, move right, jump, and now we can start using this character to help us build our world. I like to get the character in place, makes the world building much easier. So now that we've begun our world building, I'm using some free assets that I got off of Unity's asset store. Now this can be a great place to get some of your models for kit bashing or just whatever you need to help you design the game quickly without having to spend a bunch of time creating all the models yourself. It can be very time consuming, especially if you don't have the know-how. I'm going for an International Space Station style, like close corridors. I think this will be a great environment to really sell the claustrophobia and the tension that I want to get from the aliens chasing you down, especially while you have to navigate these corridors and take control of zones. Because the whole idea that we're going for here is a King of the Hill style environment control. So here we're just going to duplicate what we've already previously created and rapid fire create our tunnels, or our corridors rather. This way we can really quickly prototype how we want the environment to look without spending a lot of time on the tiny details. So now our corridors are looking pretty good, although we have a couple flaws here and there, some gaps. Those are very easy to fix. All we have to do is re-snap it to a better location and it should take care of that. The corridors are looking pretty good though. I think the claustrophobic vibe that I was going for is being really sold here, and I think once we start adding in some doorways and different levels, it'll be looking really good. The next phase we're going to start is the verticality. We want to add some depth to this world because right now it's just all on one plane, very linear, and that's just not fun. So we're going to add some different levels here. We're going to create an upper floor and a bottom floor, and this will create a lot of variety in where we can add our enemies and the zones that we want to protect. Now we're going to be using some of the assets from the package that I downloaded earlier to help create the connections between our upper and lower floors. We're going to do this by creating ramps, and this will allow not only us to traverse, but also the AI to traverse. Now that the connection to the bottom floor is finished, we can start to the top. And for this, I'm thinking we use a grav lift, something like from Halo. And this will be a pretty simple effect. We're just going to create a circle here as our base, and then we're going to add a cylinder on top of that and give it a transparent texture and no hitbox. Then all we have to do is make a simple script so that when you're inside of it, it'll add a force to our player going upwards. Okay, let's test out our grav lift and see if it's working. Oh yes, working totally as intended. Let's amplify that up and see if it's a little bit better. Oh my, well, it's definitely amplified. Let's see if maybe we can find a middle ground here, because this is still a bit extreme. Now that we've got our connection to the upper floor working, I'm going to design what I want the upper floor to actually be. I'm thinking we do this cross shape, and at the end of each point of the cross, we can have a connection going straight down to the previous level. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get the AI to fall down with us using the nav mesh, but it will at least be an interesting way for the player to navigate both up and down. So this is the design I went for. I wanted to create this glass here to allow some light to come in because I realized it was very dark in those tunnels, and while that does create a lot of tension, it also reduces the detail you get from a lot of the effects that I want to implement. So adding in those glass panes for the light, I think will add a ton of just texture to the world. And with that, we've got the basics of our environment finished. I went down here, added some walls to really solidify the bottom floor because it felt like it was just kind of unseparated. So now that we've got that in place, I think we're ready to move on to start adding our enemies. We need to give this world some life now. Before we do that, however, we are going to revisit our movement script because, unfortunately, the first way I did it was not the most intelligent, so we fixed that. Now it's a lot smoother, and there's a difference between the acceleration between when you're grounded versus when you're in the air. This creates a much more realistic expectation of movement. So to my left here, we have a list of things that I want to accomplish before I can consider this game complete. The basic things we need are enemy spawning, which we will use a nav mesh, and them to pursue the player on that nav mesh. This is a pretty simple thing to execute. All we need to do is keep track of the player's position and tell the enemy go to that position. The enemies also need health, and so does the player, so that the combat can actually happen between them. Once we have those things in place, all we really need is the zones for the player to defend and a way to keep track of the points. So as you can see, the floor is all blue, and this is defining our nav mesh floor. This is what the enemies will spawn on. So I've brought in some, oh boy, well, I was about to say I brought in some code from a previous project to spawn the enemies in, but of course when you do that, it never just goes as planned. So we've got these little motionless ants following us around, but it's a start. It'll at least save us some time, I hope. Now that we've got some enemies in here, let's actually be able to shoot them. So we're going to create our little shooting script here. This is a simple like one-click kill type script, and once we get this in place, we can actually start testing the enemies. So let's see how this looks. Okay, so as you can see, they are freezing in place. That is their current form of death. We're going to add some ragdolls now. Ah, yes. Much better. That's what we expect to see. Now that they're falling as a ragdoll, we're going to start tweaking some of the UI here. We're going to give ourselves a reticle, and we're going to make it turn red when it hovers over the enemies so we can actually see what we're aiming at. That's going to make it a lot more enjoyable. Now that that's in place, we're going to start working on our zones. These are going to be what gives the player points. So all we're going to do here is we're going to create a sphere. We're going to do the same effect that we did to the grav lift by creating a transparent color and just applying that to it, and then making its hitbox just be a trigger. This will allow us to go inside of it but still register when the player has entered it so that we can give the player points when it does so. So now that we've got a zone created, we need to actually say where all of the different spawn locations should be. We can do this by just dragging it around the map and saving the positions of these locations to an array, and then we can just cycle through that array. It's a pretty simple process. As we test out some of the locations here, we can see I have a small grav lift bug, but that's okay. We will most certainly get around to fixing that, I'm sure. Spoiler alert, we never get around to fixing it, but that's okay. What we are working on now is keeping track of the score. So we have our canvas here, and that's how we're going to actually see the score when we enter in these zones. So you can see the number going up over here, and that is to indicate how many seconds the player has been defending a zone. Now the zone will move every 30 seconds or so, depending on what I decide to make it at the end, and then the player will only get points when within that zone. So now we've got a gun here. I got this for free off the Unity Asset Store, which is a great place to get anything you need to create a game, especially models. So now we can actually see some sort of feedback while we're shooting. So as you can see right now, the gun does not track with the player, so why don't we quickly set up something where it does. Okay, here we go. So now you can see it moves with the player. It's a little crude, but for the sake of this project, I think it'll work just fine. Now that that's working, we're going to go back and fix some earlier bugs. Before they were floating, we want to get them back down onto the ground so that their feet actually look like they are walking on the ground, and fix their animations. We also went back and added some extra height to the player because he was feeling a little minuscule in this world. So now that that's done, we're going to start adding in health to our canvas. This will allow the player to see what their current health is and if they're going to die. Our last technical obstacle is to create a simple game over script. To accomplish this, all we're going to do is keep track of the player's health, which we already are, and when it reaches 0, freeze the timescale of the world and display a game over message to the player. After that, we are going to take a look at these enemies. We added their texture finally, and they are looking gruesome. This brings them so much more into the world and just makes them much more terrifying. And with that, I think we are ready to show off the final version of the game. So without further ado, let's take a look. Here we are in our game's final state. I saved the best changes for last, which is adding a skybox and some post-processing. These two things alone tend to have the biggest visual impact on a game and can really bring this universe we created to life. Now with all these corridors filled to the brim with aliens, our original aspirations to create a sense of tension and claustrophobia really come through as the player gets surrounded and their escape points are cut off. I'm really pleased with how the movement feels through these corridors as you hunt down the next zone to defend. I think for creating this experience in a single day, we did pretty well at accomplishing most of our goals. However, there are definitely some areas that are a little lacking. I would have liked to add some tactile feedback on the gun through a muzzle flash, some sort of sound effect when shooting, and maybe a laser would really help sell the effect. For the enemies, they really could have benefited from some variation in size and color, as well as sound effects as they walk around and attack the player. These things can really help immerse the player in the world we are creating and elevate the atmosphere. Lastly, I may have forgotten to fix this grav lift bug, but that's alright, it's a feature now, and we get this spectacular view of the space station we made. As we come to a close here, I just want to thank you all for watching. I am very new to this, and I welcome any feedback you guys have. If you could like the video and subscribe, if you want to see more content just like this, I would love to hear any suggestions you guys have. And any games you want me to make, leave comments down below, and maybe they'll be added to our game generator for the next video. Alright, I'll see you next time. Have a good one.